Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Abdurrahim, and I'm one of the Associate Directors of Development here at Georgetown University Law Center. We're thrilled to have so many of you with us today for this special event with Professor Jill Morrison. Today's event is part of our 150th anniversary celebrations at Georgetown Law Center, and it's the third in our International Conversations series. If you haven't had the chance already, we hope you will take time to check out our 150th anniversary website, share memories, and watch live and on-demand events to celebrate 150 years at Georgetown Law Center. Before we get started, I wanted to highlight ways you can engage with the conversation today. At any time, feel free to add questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. At around 10:35 a.m., we will move to a Q&A segment. Please continue to write in your questions and they will be shared with the speakers. Today's event will be recorded and posted to our 150th anniversary website. I am so honored to introduce Professor Jill Morrison, Executive Director of the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship Program and the Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa Fellowship Program, also known by LAWA. Professor Morrison teaches the LAWA seminar, where each of the LLM candidates develops a thesis focusing on a particular women's human rights issue. She also teaches 2 seminars in her field of specialty, reproductive health, rights, and justice. Professor Morrison returned to Georgetown Law Center in 2012 after 13 years at the National Women's Law Center, where she was the 1998 to 99 Women's Law and Public Policy Fellow. Our event today will be moderated by LAWA Fellow Heather Chidara, class of 2021. Prior to becoming a LAWA Fellow, Heather practiced for over 10 years as a human rights lawyer and women's rights advocate in South Africa and Zimbabwe. There, she had litigated on behalf of women seeking access to housing and equitable distribution of assets in family law proceedings. Driven by a desire to realize economic justice and challenge the ways in which patriarchal norms marginalize women in her community, Heather has advanced women's rights in her representation of women in custody, domestic violence, and divorce cases. Heather earned her Bachelor's of Law in 2010 from the University of Fort Hare in East London, South Africa. Her LAWA research will help deepen her understanding of South African housing law in order to develop strategies for actualizing women's housing rights. Today's event will also include reflections from LAWA alumni Prudence Matiso and Law and Public Policy Fellow Christy Blewett. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to Heather to kick off our conversation today.
I'm so happy to be here with you today and to be speaking with Professor Jill Morrison about a program that I'm honored to be part of. As mentioned, I'm presently a LAWA Fellow from South Africa, and prior to joining the program, I was a practicing attorney advocating for women's rights in South Africa and Zimbabwe. My LAWA thesis is an extension of the work I was involved in South Africa, as I'll be discussing the impact of the South African Redistribution and Development Program on previously disadvantaged women's right to housing. The program is exposing me to diverse perspectives in advancing women's rights. This has been an incredible unique year to be a LAWA Fellow, yet the program remains so critical for students who partake in it, as well as Georgetown law community. With that, Jill, I would like to ask you, can you share a little about your background with our audience? I know that you were a US Fellow of the program as well.
Sure. So I was a fellow in 1998-99, following a few other fellowships. Then I stayed on at my placement organization, the National Women's Law Center, which is one of the flagship organizations of the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship Program. I was incredibly happy there, never thought I would leave. And then the former director of the fellowship program mentioned to me one day when I was just speaking with students, I'd come in to try to recruit for the program. Mary Hartnett mentioned to me that she would be leaving. And when she said that she would be leaving, kind of the idea popped into my head about what a tremendous opportunity it would be to be even more involved with the fellowship program, that it had such a huge impact on my life and my life in Washington. I did not plan on staying here. I'd actually put in my Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship application that I would be in Washington for 1 year. And now, of course, 20 some odd years later, I'm still here. So they made a liar of me. So that's just a bit about me.
Thank God you got to stay in Washington, D.C. What changes have you made to the program since becoming a director of the program?
So some of the changes that I've made have reflected kind of the changes in the movement. So once upon a time, a lot of the LAWA fellows were working on actually getting laws in place to protect women's rights. Now, a lot of the countries have those laws, and it's just a matter of making sure those laws are carried out, if they're implemented, how they're implemented properly. So one of the major changes that I made was to make sure that the thesis is very forward-looking. So very often in academia, you'll get titles like a case study on blah, 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 or a comparative analysis of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. That's not serving the purpose of this program. I want it to be, a thesis to be something that is forward-looking and actionable. So write about something that you want to change. And I think that's for the fellows that come in, they're already activists. So this also feels very natural to them. Another change that I'm really proud of and that I think the fellows really enjoy is that I bring in expert speakers on each of their subject matter areas. So the fellows come in, they're picking their topics, and very often they are deep experts in what they're writing about. Heather is housing. Our other fellow this year, Rahim, is writing about polygamy. I don't have that expertise. So what I do at the beginning of the spring semester is ask the fellows to identify someone who they've been citing over and over again in their paper, whose work they really admire, and have that person come in. Usually it has been virtually because these people are located all over the world. To interact with the fellow. And I would love to hear, Heather just had this experience. I'd love to hear her talk about what it was like for her.
It was actually a very great opportunity because I was like speaking to someone whose work I had been reading about for like since I started writing my thesis, and I could ask him the questions I had, which I was thinking a book had not really specified, and she really managed to explain it further. And now she even invited me to further communicate with her as I'm writing my thesis, which I found to be like very helping. And it's a wow opportunity because this is someone whom I was placing in very high regard. For me to have that opportunity to be in like an email away or a phone call away, it's a rare opportunity. Yeah.
So I love it because the fellows then feel like they're a part of this community of scholars, which they are. And it also starts, as you said, this person that you had on this very high platform, you start realizing that they kind of like your ideas too, and that you're a real contributor to this. Prudence, if you could jump in and talk, I remember yours so clearly. Prudence's thesis was on valuing women's contributions during the dissolution of marriage. And she invited in someone who had done exactly this project in the United States in the 1970s. Prudence, would you care to talk about that experience?
Sure, thank you, Professor Jill. So I wrote my thesis on non-monetary contribution of property in Kenya. And the professor that we invited to speak on that particular topic was Professor Mary, I recall, from New York University of Law. And she had done so much work, empirical research work on non-monetary contribution, like Professor said, in the 1970s, in the 80s, as well as in the 90s. And she gave me so much insight as I was looking to conduct a deeper or further research into non-monetary contributions, and her insights were really helpful. And I mean, it was such a great opportunity, Professor, to get to speak to her and just to understand. And I recall her sharing that the United States is not where it's supposed to be, but people or the laws were making progress towards ensuring that women's non-monetary contribution was taken care of.
Thank you, Prudence.
Yeah, that it really is an exciting opportunity, and yeah, I would really love to thank you for that, because it actually really helps with our thesis writing. What is your biggest challenge so far as a director of the program?
So the single biggest challenge is with, I think, with most kind of organizations functioning as nonprofits, is funding. So right now I'm actually in the LAWA application period. And because right now the program doesn't have the funding to provide for living expenses for the LAWA fellows, it means that the fellows have to be self-funded. This is a tremendous amount. It's approximately $30,000 if the fellows don't have a family member to live with, like fortunately Heather does. And it can be completely prohibitive. So we know that there are lots of talented attorneys throughout the continent who we just can't reach because of this particular prohibition on them having to have those funds up front. Another big challenge, of course, is that a lot of foundations don't fund things like living expenses. The Georgetown is very generous in providing a complete tuition waiver for the fellows, but that is the biggest hurdle, and one that I keep trying to overcome by looking at some of the other kind of outside of the mainstream foundations that don't cover living expenses. But we really just need one generous benefactor who actually might be out there somewhere.
That would be great, because I know a lot of lawyers from Africa would really want to be part of this program, but they really don't have access to that much amount of money for their living expenses. And how does the program keep in contact? How does the program keep in LAWA fellows engaged and in contact once they go back to their home countries?
So once you're a part of either of our communities, either the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship community or the LAWA community, you're in it for life. So as typical, we exchange lots and lots of emails. And then the LAWA fellows come to see the program as a resource. So I'll get emails saying, we need some fact finding in this particular country. Do you have anyone there? Or we're looking for someone in this particular country with this expertise. And then I can go down our entire list and connect them with the people that they want to connect with. We've also seen fellows independently within their own countries get together and say, okay, we have all of this expertise and this knowledge. Let's see what changes we can make. Let's organize among ourselves to start sharing resources. And then because the women's rights community kind of globally feels small, but definitely within the continent of Africa, it is small. All the time I'll see fellows running into each other at conferences. So I'll get all of their selfies together saying, look who I found, Professor Jill. And then they're doing the work. So they're constantly kind of sharing knowledge, resources, strategies. And then I, of course, invite the fellows back to share their expertise with the current fellows. So to talk about their experiences like Prudence is today. And they also, of course, share information on jobs, on positions. So it's a kind of thriving organic community that they tap back into all the time. I should say the same, of course, goes for the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellows. It's even more obvious how that works, given that we are one country as opposed to an entire continent. But within any area of women's rights, eventually you're going to stumble over another women's law and public policy fellow. And they are constantly connecting with one another. I should also say that one of the ways we pull back in the LAWA fellows is through the clinical fellowship that Christy had. The International and Comparative Women's Human Rights Clinic very often partners with our LAWA alums in developing their cases. So that's a very important connection that to work with somebody on the ground who knows the community, who knows the situation. Christy, would you like to comment on any of that work?
Sure. Yeah, I was a law and public policy fellow in 2014 to 2015. And like Jill said, the clinic's work, so I was also a teaching fellow for the International Women's Human Rights Clinic at Georgetown. And really our go-to resources for local partners on the ground in various sub-Saharan African countries are former LAWA fellows. So I think I've done work through the clinic with former LAWAs in Uganda, also in Ghana and Kenya. And in Uganda and Ghana, like Jill said, it was where really it was these group of alumni who had really come together. I think in Uganda, it's even called LAWU, Law and Advocacy for Women, Uganda. And then in Kenya, I was directing the clinic that year. And actually it was the director, the newly appointed director of FIDA, what was going to be our partner, was a LAWA with Jill at the time. So that certainly made it easy for preparation and planning. But they are always, the LAWA program and the International Women's Human Rights Clinic, they're very closely, I'd say, intertwined, especially when the LAWAs go back and are working in their home country, for sure.
And I should say that the LAWA program was actually founded by Sue Della Ross, who's a professor here at Georgetown, who still teaches the International Comparative Women's Human Rights class. And one of her goals was to make sure that this, what she saw as kind of this burgeoning group of amazing talent on the continent, that they could get additional support. So to bring the tremendous resources of Georgetown University Law Center to bear on giving these already supremely talented attorneys additional training and additional focus. I'm shocked at the work that they're doing, but when I look at the applicants' transcripts, very often they'll have one human rights course on it. Whereas here, they can have nothing but an entire menu of human rights courses to choose from, including within their own subspecialties, be it gender and sexuality or environmental law, you name it. So that was kind of the goal of the program. So the kind of two parts are working together very closely now to kind of lift that up and of course lift up the talents of all of these lawyers on the continent.
Can you share with examples of how LAWAs have impacted advanced women's rights in their home countries?
So let's start with some of the cases that, of course, Christy has mentioned. So some of the projects that the LAWAs have worked on have addressed issues of marital property rights, have addressed, in Uganda, it was marital rape. Definitely, we've had cases involving bride price that have been led by LAWA fellows. We have LAWA fellows who are now sitting on the African Human Rights Commission and on the CEDAW committee. So these are the highest level human rights organizations in the world. But I think it's just as important that when I receive kind of an email from a fellow with a picture of her out in the village, doing some what they call sensitization, or what we would call public education on a particular issue, talking to a group of schoolgirls about their right to not be subjected to early marriage, for example, or their right to try to resist being subjected to female genital cutting. Those are just as important as the things that are going on within the courts or the things that are going on within the human rights bodies. all of the work that the LAWAs are doing, be it at the judiciary, where they're actually making laws, be it as public officials within their human rights commissions, and with their one-on-one work in inspiring the women and girls and boys back in their home countries. It's all equally important and it all contributes. One of my favorites is that we actually have a LAWA alum who is a traditional ruler. So a lot of the kind of duality of the legal systems that very often prevents women's rights from being actualized on the continent is the fact that there are these two legal systems, right? So there was their traditional system, and of course the law, the written law legal system. So to have someone who has been through this program be a traditional ruler and give her interpretations to those laws is somewhat kind of beyond our imagination.
What do the women in law, the WLPPF fellows usually say LAWA fellows add to their experiences?
So I will start out by saying at the very beginning, when I just have everyone's bios laid out, all of the US fellows who are recent, pretty much recent graduates, some have a little more experience, but a lot of our recent graduates, the first thing that they say is, what is my name doing on a page with this person? Because this person has actually done stuff. They know things, and the ink is still drying on my diploma. So at first, it's just a lot of intimidation to be in the same room with the LAWA fellows because they're experienced, they know things, they're international, they are bold and daring enough to go to law school in a foreign country. But then once that breaks down, it's just this sharing of knowledge because the LAWA fellows are US law students for the first time. And the US fellows have successfully completed law school in the US. So clearly there are going to be some things that the US fellows know that the LAWAs don't. But I would love to hear from Christy and Prudence about your interactions with the US fellows during your fellowship year.
Sure, I can start. Yeah, for me personally, I mean, again, because I was teaching in the International Women's Human Rights Clinic and that clinic's focus is Sub-Saharan Africa. For me, the LAWAs really provided my only source of true colleagues. I was the only teaching fellow in that program. And it was somebody who I could strategize with, who I could think critically through the issues, rather than it just being the students or the tenured faculty. So for me, they were really my true colleagues for that and who I could go to, besides the formal partnering that we do with former LAWAs. But it was like not just me. I know that the woman who I was teaching in the domestic violence clinic at the time, she also formed a very close bond with one of the LAWAs our year. They started an organization that was aimed at getting menstrual products for when girls were going through their menstrual cycle to girls in rural Uganda. And they happened to have the same birthday. So they started an Over the Moon nonprofit, and they worked very closely together on that. So that was something that was very important to both of them, and they were able to move that forward. But on a professional front as well, the LAWA was a magistrate in Uganda. And the DV fellow was able to provide her with like standardized forms, for example, for a temporary restraining order. So, for some of us, I think it's just having people who can be colleagues on more of a intellectual or strategic level, but I think there can also be a back and forth as far as technical support and sharing of technical ideas as well. I'll pass to Prudence.
Thank you, Christy. So interacting with the US fellows was a rewarding experience for me, and they gave a lot of very rich insights into the US legal system. having come from a very different legal system and coming to the US, which was very unfamiliar and an unfamiliar legal system, they were able to give so much clarity into the way the US system operates. And they also provided a lot of technical support when it came to doing the research work. And they were able to guide us and guide me personally into the kind of research issues that I was looking at and give us a US perspective.
And I would say another really important thing that I see going on very early on is not that our US fellows necessarily come to the program thinking that the US is perfect, but when they actually get in deep discussions with the LAWA fellows about some of the kind of way things are done in the LAWA's home countries, how the vast majority of their constitutions actually have what we would consider to be an equal rights amendment, where equality is written into the Constitution and it's not in the United States. It really broadens their perspective on kind of the US being this model for women's rights. So although there are a lot of things that the United States is doing well, when the US fellows look around and see that all of the LAWA fellows countries have paid maternity leave, they really start questioning. It really starts kind of, I would say, radicalizing the US fellows in a way to say, wait a minute, there's no excuse for us to not have some of these things that are so basic that the rest of the world has. The other thing is the fun of it, just the pure fun. We're talking about a lot of serious stuff, but my job is a lot of fun. And a lot of that goes on with the cultural exchange. We have game nights where we kind of get to understand what all of the different brands of soda are in Kenya when we're playing things like categories, and the US fellows are going, well, that's not a brand of soda. And then they're like, it is in Kenya. So it's just a lot of fun between the two groups. And then I can personally say that the two LAWA fellows during my year, I think they also help the US fellows realize that they know things, right? That there's actually an expertise that you have, even as a recent graduate of law school, that you can lend to someone who has a lot more experience than you do. And it really does end up for many fellows being the highlight of their program, is having this interaction with the LAWAs.
Yeah, it really is a great experience. You have kind of answered my next question. Which was, what is the most favorite part of running these two programs? I don't know if you have anything further to add from that.
I have a lot more. I have a lot more to add. What's the top of my list? So our dear Justice Ginsburg, seeing the fellows interact with her, definitely like the highlight of not just running the program, but really of my life. I don't know if Christy remembers this, but Christy had an especially memorable interaction with Justice Ginsburg. So usually the fellows come in, so they kind of ask me what questions they can ask her and what's appropriate. Christy asked the question that I think every single fellow ever has wanted to ask Justice Ginsburg. Christy, do you remember what that was? I'm going to put you on the spot. You don't remember? Okay, so Christy.
No, not at all.
So Christy comes in and she says essentially to Justice Ginsburg, do you know how much you mean to us? Do you remember this?
I think it was more of a declaration.
Yeah.
Question.
It was. So Christy just fangirls all over Justice Ginsburg. And it was absolutely one of my favorite moments. Another reason why that interaction creates a favorite moment is because very often the LAWA fellows who are in the room, they are where Justice Ginsburg was when she was devising all of these court cases that laid the groundwork for gender equity in the United States. So in seeing her, right, live and in person, what the fellows got from that was like, she's a person, and she was a young lawyer the same way I am a young lawyer, and I can do this. So absolutely one of my favorite things. And then all of this, they're just a billion small moments. So one of my favorite times of the year is when the LAWA fellows finalize their thesis sentences. Do you remember my reaction when you finalized your thesis sentence? Heather, Prudence, you can jump in here too.
Yeah, I remember it was, but it really is a milestone, because just putting down that thesis sentence, it's not a joke. It's not.
Prudence, you remember your thesis sentence being finalized, what that day was like?
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. After 20 or even more revisions, but I am glad, really.
Yeah, and so my other kind of top moments are when fellows either discover a new talent, or they have to revise their perceptions of themselves about what they can't do. So I have had several fellows who came in, definite introverts, definitely the shyest person in the room, who from the very beginning were dreading doing the presentations. So at the end of the year, towards later in the spring semester, the fellows give presentations on their thesis topics. It's 10 minutes each, and they go around to USAID and the State Department and Main Campus School of Foreign Service and our campus and GW, giving all of these presentations. So I had one fellow who looked at this at the very beginning of the year and was like, this is not my thing. This is not what I do. I'm very quiet, and this is not going to work. Heather, you look like this is sounding like you. But listen. So as it turned out, this particular fellow had a real talent for presenting. She was just a great presenter. She had an incredibly engaging topic, which I had told her from the beginning. I said, U.S. audiences are going to love this topic. They're going to direct all their questions at you, which they did. So after we come from the first presentation, she is floating on air. Her walk is different, and she's like, when's the next one? So when I see that someone's like, oh, I'm not good at this, a lot of fellows come in. It's not normal for, in many of their first law degrees, to write a 40 or 50 page paper. So a lot come in going like, I don't quite know how I'm going to do this, but if you tell me I can, then okay, I'm going to just trust you. And then they put it down, and they get to the end of this, and they are so proud of what they produced. They're actually in awe of their own work, which I absolutely love. The US fellows, there comes a point where they have to submit monthly reports, both the LAWAs and the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellows, on their activities. And there'll come a time in their report where they will start talking about building an expertise, and how within their organization, they are the person that people come to on a particular subject matter. And the pride at realizing their confidence and their competency as lawyers absolutely just makes my heart sing. So yeah, there are way too many favorite parts to mention. I also love it when there's somebody kind of in the outside world who just happens to Google Africa lawyer Washington, and they find our program, and then they want to draw on the expertise of our fellows. So I have fellows presenting Heather will be presenting at a class on sexual assault. Raheem is going to be presenting on the issue of child marriage. So giving them these opportunities to really showcase their work to the world also makes me extremely happy.
And you know, I from the beginning of the program, I told you that my life is in your hands. I'm trusting you fully for this whole year. So far, you have not been disappointing. So
thank you. I want to hear from you all. What was your favorite part of the program? Prudence, Christy, and then Heather for your shortened duration.
I think just thinking on top of my head, Professor, I would say participating in the LAWA seminar, and just having the opportunity to conduct a very deep research into marital property issues in Kenya, because that allowed me to understand women's rights violations in a deeper way in Kenya, and helped me to provide recommendations or solutions towards addressing such a pervasive human rights violation in the country. I look back, and honestly, for me, I'm really proud of having participated in the LAWA seminar.
I think for me, mine's more on the personal level than the academic level or professional level, I'd say. I came out of the fellowship with two of my very, very, very close friends were LAWAs the year of my fellowship. And I managed to be able to visit and stay with Juliet in Uganda in 2018. I saw Vicky in South Sudan in 2019. I also stayed with, oh my God, now I'm blanking. But she wasn't my LAWA, Teresa, in Kenya when I went back there in 2018 as well. So I think for me, it's been really nice to have the personal connection. And yeah, Juliet and Vicky were two of my very, very dear friends. And they honestly helped me get through what was a really tough professional year. So I think the support that you get from the fellowship program for me was really the best part.
For me, I would say it has been in terms of like writing. I can say that my writing has improved greatly, and sometimes I'm even shocked at what I can do, because some of the things I didn't know I was capable of doing, like my writing, as well as the other thing which I love about it is also the connection which I get from the US fellows. Like we even have a chat group, we have a book club, just getting to hear the other side of life, which is a foreign for me, but also I'm getting to see that, oh, this is how people live. This is how they do things, and putting it into my life as well. It's a very enriching experience.
And that's great to hear, because of course the elephant in the room is that Heather has been doing this virtually. So you've been to campus a handful of times, but the vast majority of the program has been virtual. And she still has this connection with the other fellows in the program. When you say kind of the cultural things there, it's really constant. One year, I know we need to turn to questions soon, but I have to tell the story. One year they were doing a staging of the vagina monologues on campus. And I, of course, invited the LAWAs to this very unique experience and took them out to dinner beforehand. And every time I would say the name of the play, the LAWAs would be like, "We don't say that word in our own home privately. Why are you saying it in a restaurant?" So just the fun of that. The other thing is I'm a pescatarian, so I don't eat meat. The LAWA's continuous fascination with the fact that I don't eat meat is a source of kind of endless amusement. So yeah, it's just the constant kind of figuring each other out is also a great joy of mine.
Thank you, Jill, Christy, and Prudence. I would like to turn things to Sarah for our question and answer segment.
Thank you, Heather. We've received a number of questions through the chat function and also the RSVP form. One of the questions we received, Professor Morrison, was the LAWA thesis topics sound fantastic. Are these presentations open to the public?
So the live presentations, I think as a result, one of those kind of things that you're going to do now because of Zoom, I will always at least do one set of Zoom presentations that will be open to the public. Otherwise, the presentations are recorded and they're actually available on the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship website. But if you want to get on our mailing list, and we do not give you a lot of things, we have a twice-year newsletter and then probably 3 additional events that we will let you know about. Then I can make sure you know about when the live presentations will be happening.
Wonderful. Another question came in through the chat function, and they asked, what projects or cases has the program helped to develop in Angola or Mozambique?
So we have not had fellows from those two countries. I think we are now spanning over 20 countries, but not those two. So unfortunately, we have not.
Well, that's just a great opportunity, hopefully, for future LAWAs to apply from those countries. What has been your most outstanding achievement since you started working as director of the program?
Ooh. Wow, what a great question. My most outstanding achievement. Oh, getting the LAWAs to publish their theses. So I've been kind of adamant about getting them to think about that from the very beginning. And I put right on the syllabus that your goal of this class is to produce something that is publishable. And now more and more of them do. So I not only encourage it, I actually kind of pay, there's a small fee that's associated with submitting it. I pay that fee. After they graduate, we continue to work on it. So if I say, I know these particular things are what a law review editor would say, would have a problem with, we continue to work on that. So really getting their work out into the world so they understand that what they produced is of that high a quality that it should be in a journal. So.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Another attendee wrote in and said, as a public servant and diplomat, I've watched over the years several countries across the continent continue to slide backwards on democracy and human rights. How do we reach foreign policy, humanitarian, and local leaders and sway them to reprioritize the equality, protections, and empowerment of women and the education of girls?
Wow. I would love to hear Prudence or Christy's thoughts on that.
I knew you were going to ask that, and I was thinking, oh my God, that was a long question. Can you say it again just to make sure I have it?
Yeah, absolutely. The question is, how do we reach foreign policy, humanitarian, and local leaders with all that they have on their plate today and sway them to reprioritize the equality, protections, and empowerment of women and education of girls?
Yeah, not only just a big question, but obviously a big daunting task. I mean, I think personally for me, I guess the way to do it, one way to do it is through continuation of programs like LAWA, where you're further educating, I should say, women who are going to go back to their countries and not only serve as role models, but Jill mentioned some of the roles that they've been in. Hillary, who sits on the CEDAW committee, or in Uganda, one of the women from the first LAWA class sits on the Supreme Court of Uganda. And I know that these aren't humanitarian or foreign policy actors, but I think that they are in positions that are just as well served to bolster girls' education, women's education, and women's rights. I mean, the thing is that you can have the UN, the CEDAW committee, you can have all the human rights committees, and you can get the best decisions from them, but they are not going to be implemented at the home country level unless you have strong women's advocates there on the ground to push it through. So I think just getting more and more, not just women, but men who are also, I know LAWA, I think, has had maybe just one man, but two now, okay. But whoever's passionate in this area, I think it really does need to be people who are from the country, who are advocating for it and who are really the face of it. And there are a lot of organizations in these countries that are already doing a lot of work. It's just, it's a long process.
Can I add on to that? I mean, part of the goal in the LAWA thesis is identifying what is it that will make a head of state act, right? So anytime someone is just talking about throwing a lot of money at the problem, I go, that's that's not going to fly. You know what your military budget is in your country, and you know what your budget is for actually helping people is in your country, as I do in my own country. So what are the interests? How do you actually get to what their interests are? And how do you have solutions that are low cost, right, but really effective? And how do you appeal to the actual interest? So we know, right, it's been proven over and over again, right, that investing in women raises the stakes for everybody in a nation, right? If you want to help everyone, you help women, and all of those boats are going to rise. So really focusing kind of on what their own interest is, because ultimately, right, we're dealing with politicians. You have to ask what is in it for them.
Thank you. One question that just came in asks, as the program continues, are there any plans to expand the countries, continents the international fellows come from?
Yeah, so not the continents. The Africa focus is very purposeful, and of course, providing enough diversity, right? Enough geographic diversity, enough income diversity, cultural diversity, religious diversity, while still having a focus that allows those fellows to interact and to build on one another's work. In terms of country diversity, always a goal of mine. So I have our highest tally countries are Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. I'm always looking for fellows from underrepresented countries. That is absolutely a priority goal. Not that I don't love my fellows from Kenya, Prudence, but those are the countries where we know that they've built that support, they've built that network, they have the non-governmental organizations, but for those that don't have that, those are the ones we would want to focus on. And right now there are enough of those just within Africa that we would not have any intentions to diversify anytime soon.
This next question is also a very broad question, so I don't know if you would also include the fellows in this. It says, what are your thoughts on foreign aid creating dependency amongst developing countries?
So Heather, I can imagine that you have some opinions, as does Prudence. I will start by saying, kind of the foreign aid dependency question, I think is kind of the equivalent of social services and the government question within the United States. If you look at the conditions that give rise to that dependency, unless you fix those conditions, you can't pull away the aid, right? So the dependency on foreign aid is very much a legacy of the plundering of resources throughout the continent and colonialism. Right? So unless you're fixing those things, you can't start having the conversation about, are you just dependent on foreign aid, right? If you're not fixing structural racism, right, and the prison industrial complex, you really can't have a conversation about reducing social services in a community in the United States. So that's just my view. Did either of you want to add anything?
I think I would agree with you in that. I think we discussed it in our last class last week, but we were talking about social services in South Africa as well. And yeah, if you can't really, as she has said, that you can't really say it has to be removed when you haven't sorted out the structural problems. I think they should start sorting out the foundation. But I was reading this article where it was showing that some other countries like Eritrea, if I'm not mistaken, they've actually improved very well the moment they stopped getting foreign aid. But I really don't know how they did it, so I'm not in a position to advise. But maybe studying further about what happened in Eritrea, what was their techniques and how did they get there. But yeah, that's all I can say for now.
And someone else wrote in, what has been, if any, the legal impacts of COVID-19 on the lives of women? Have laws around COVID helped or hurt advance gender equity agenda for women in the US and internationally?
So I can answer that part on the US situation. So I teach, one of the classes I teach is reproductive justice. And I also guide students through a paper writing process for that class. And some of my students have written specifically on this issue, on what has been the impact of COVID-19 in terms of reproductive health, in terms of maternity care, in terms of child care. So I think we're still in it. So we have yet to see. So we know that it's at least changing our conversation over things like childcare, on the obvious childcare crisis in this country, on maternal health care, right? So we see that there have been systems set up, for example, to do telemedicine. So might that actually improve the ability of people to connect with doctors when they need to and avoid kind of the expense and the hassle of going in for a doctor's visit when you have a small child at home. Another major area where we've seen kind of go up and down is access to abortion services. So there was a ruling in Maryland about access to medication abortion and reducing some of the barriers and the hurdles that women encounter in trying to access that medication. And then that rule was overturned by the Trump administration, and that's still in flux. So yeah, in terms of what it's done for kind of women's lives, I think it's really highlighted the unique burdens that women take on in terms of disproportionate responsibility for childcare duties, and the special role that access to reproductive health care plays in us generally leading healthy lives.
I don't know if any of the other fellows want to add in.
I would just add to that. I think Jill hit it exactly. I think there's a lot on the access to maternal health and reproductive health. And then, of course, just the consideration about what, for example, curfews or restrictions on movement in certain countries might be doing for domestic violence and women who are then not able to leave the home, but who might need to in the case of a domestically violent relationship.
And so our final question today is, somebody wrote in, thank you so much for this conversation. How can I support LAWA and the Law and Public Policy Fellows?
So the easiest way, of course, is to support us through funding. All of our gifts are incredibly valued. We're not a large program. We're not a wasteful program at all. All of your money goes directly to support the fellows, including things like when we are live, getting them winter coats so that their commutes are more comfortable, including occasionally fees for our special speakers or trainings that we want to do for the fellows. So any amount is greatly appreciated. The other way is coming out to support our events. So virtual events right now, but eventually when we're back on campus, we do a welcome lunch and of course the fellows presentations at the end of the year, and having a diverse audience for those is always greatly encouraging to the fellows.
Thank you so much, Professor Morrison. Heather, Christy, and Prudence, thank you also so much. Oh, sorry, one more question. Actually, it's a comment that just came in and I wanted to share it. It said, winter coats are so appreciated. Remember the cold winters in 2013. So really
Another fun part of my job is convincing my LAWA fellows that no other fellow has in fact died from the cold. That they actually think that it's so cold that I'm going to die. And I just say, every year I have one that's especially cold sensitive. One year was Alice. Alice, you're not going to die from the cold.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Morrison, and for all the fellows for joining us today. Thank you to our audience for joining and your engagement. We look forward to following up with everyone on the many ways that you can engage and support the LAWA and the Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship programs. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you.